Einen wunderschönen guten Tag und herzlich willkommen da draußen beim vierten Digital Summit. Ich bin Julia André, ich leite bei der Körber-Stiftung in Hamburg den Bereich Bildung und ich freue mich riesig, euch alle heute hier begrüßen zu können bei der ersten Home Edition des Digital Summit. In dem Videoeinspieler eben habt ihr Ausschnitte gesehen aus den vergangenen Jahren. Da kann man natürlich schon ein bisschen wehmütig werden, wenn man das so sieht. In diesem Jahr ist aus bekannten Gründen alles anders. Wir können euch nicht hier bei uns im Körperforum in Hamburg begrüßen, direkt gegenüber vom Hamburger Hafen. Und das ist ehrlich gesagt eine Schande. Wir haben auch in diesem Jahr wieder fantastisches Wetter hier in Hamburg. Die Sonne scheint, der Ausblick ist grandios. Und ich kann ihn leider nicht mit euch teilen. Das ganze Persönliche, die persönliche Begegnung, das Vernetzen, der informelle Teil, das werden wir bestimmt alle schmerzlich vermissen. Da bin ich mir jetzt schon sicher. Gleichzeitig hat eine solche Veränderung aber natürlich auch Chancen, die sie mit sich bringt. Zum Beispiel konnten wir in diesem Jahr die Zahl der Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer immerhin auf 270 erhöhen, statt 200 von euch, die sonst hier ein- und ausgingen. Und bei über 600 Bewerbungen, die uns erreicht haben, freut uns das natürlich riesig. Und die, denen wir leider keinen Platz anbieten konnten, die können einen großen Teil des Programms, die Keynote, die gleich folgt und auch das Panel heute am späten Nachmittag, immerhin per Livestream verfolgen. Und an dieser Stelle auch Hallo und ein herzliches Willkommen an alle, die uns per Livestream zuschauen. Bei aller Veränderung bleibt natürlich auch manches gleich, glücklicherweise. Wir haben wieder in diesem Jahr ein tolles Programm zusammenbekommen, finde ich jedenfalls. Ich hoffe, ihr freut euch darauf genauso wie ich. Wir haben uns auch in diesem Jahr dafür entschieden, das kollegiale, das digitale Du zu benutzen. Ich habe damit ganz frech einfach angefangen direkt und hoffe, dass ihr das aufgreift, wenn es gleich in die, oder nicht gleich, wenn es später in die Sessions und in den gemeinsamen Austausch geht. Und auch in diesem Jahr ist der Digital Summit wieder eine wunderbare eine Gemeinschaftsproduktion zwischen der Körber-Stiftung und AppCamps. Das macht immer riesig Spaß, mit den lieben Kolleginnen und Kollegen von AppCamps das Ganze zusammen vorzubereiten. Und ich freue mich jetzt sehr, dass ich an Diana und Philipp in Süddeutschland abgeben kann. Bitte, Diana und Philipp.
Genau. Vielen Dank, Julia. Hätte mir letztes Jahr jemand gesagt, dass ich den Digital Summit in Hausschuhen die Begrüßung machen würde, dann hätte ich die Person wahrscheinlich ausgelacht. Aber tatsächlich sitze ich in Hausschuhen hier und begrüße euch alle zum Digital Summit. Hätte niemand gedacht vor einem Jahr. Wir sehen es trotzdem, und ihr habt den Satz vermutlich alle schon gehört, auch als eine Chance. Ne? Das ist ja fast schon so ein bisschen eine Leier, aber haben eben versucht, das wunderschöne Format Digital Summit ins Digitale abzubilden. Und ich glaube, wir haben uns, ich glaube nicht, ich weiß, wir haben uns Mühe gegeben, haben tolle Ideen entwickelt und sind überzeugt, dass es ein toller Tag wird. Irgendwo hakt es sicherlich immer, aber vielleicht erst ganz am Ende, wenn das Pubquiz vorbei ist, bleibt irgendwas hängen. Das wäre so ein bisschen die Hoffnung. Wir haben viel mehr Bewerbungen wieder, als wir Teilnehmer zulassen konnten. Wir haben internationale Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, was ganz toll ist. Also im Prinzip aus ganz Deutschland, ein paar aus Hamburg natürlich wie immer. Wir haben Österreich, Schweiz, wir haben Lehrkräfte aus Russland, die uns zuhören und dabei sind. Wir haben Spanien. Ne? Und jetzt könnte ich die Liste weitermachen. Ich habe es mir aufgeschrieben, aber ihr habt eine Idee von, dass es internationaler ist, als wenn es in Hamburg stattfinden würde. Und wir haben eben auch internationale Speakerinnen und Speaker, worüber wir uns sehr freuen. Wir haben Loes Damhof gleich, die in Holland momentan sitzt. Wir haben Workshop-Referentinnen aus Paris. Wir haben Philipp Schmidt, der in Cambridge sitzt und vermutlich gerade seinen Morgenkaffee trinkt. Also wir haben ein ganz internationales Setting heute und sind sehr gespannt und freuen uns, dass ihr alle an den Bildschirm, den Satz wollte ich immer schon mal sagen, willkommen an den Bildschirm da draußen, dass ihr an den Bildschirm da draußen dabei seid und diese digitale Reise mit uns mitmacht.
Genau, dem kann ich mich nur anschließen, auch was Julia sagte, dass wir leider nicht gemeinsam im Körperforum sind. Wir haben aber, was ihr ja alle schon gemerkt habt, ein Konferenztool genannt Talk mit QUE geschrieben. Und es ist einfach eine Möglichkeit, um zu sehen, wer ist denn noch mit dabei. Viele von euch haben auch Bilder hochgeladen und ein bisschen quasi beschrieben, wer ihr seid, von wo ihr seid. Das ist total schön zu sehen. Insofern nutzt es gerne, um euch zu vernetzen, um euch auszutauschen. Und das Tool wird auch noch eine Woche lang verfügbar sein. Das heißt, ihr könnt auch später noch mal reinschauen und Kontakt aufnehmen zu uns oder auch zu anderen Personen. Genau. Dann haben wir wie in jedem Jahr einen Hashtag für Social Media, DigiSummit21. Falls ihr also auf Twitter unterwegs seid, Instagram oder auf anderen sozialen Kanälen, nutzt das gerne, teilt, was ihr heute erfahrt und erlebt, damit wir da auch ein bisschen mehr teilhaben können, weil es für uns natürlich auch so ist, dass wir alle jetzt in unserem Homeoffice sitzen oder an unseren Orten und ganz wenig von euch mitbekommen. Später in den Sessions dann hoffentlich ein bisschen mehr. Genau. Und dann haben hoffentlich die meisten von euch mittlerweile das Booklet per Post bekommen und ein paar leckere Spezialitäten. Leider haben wir gehört, dass es noch nicht bei allen angekommen ist. Das tut uns total leid. Ihr habt dann im Nachhinein noch mal irgendwie eine schöne Erinnerung. Für alle anderen ist es einfach gedacht, anstatt des tollen Caterings, das wir von der Körber-Stiftung immer bekommen in Hamburg, habt ihr zumindest einen kleinen Gruß zu Hause, den ihr hoffentlich nebenbei genießen könnt. Genau, ansonsten könnt ihr in dem Booklet natürlich euch auch Notizen machen. Genau. So viel auch nochmal von uns beiden. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Wir wissen immer, es sind viele Lehrerinnen und Lehrer dabei von AppCamps, weil wir das natürlich über unseren Verteiler auch immer verschicken. Das freut uns natürlich ganz besonders. Aber auch alle, die uns vielleicht noch nicht kennen, toll, dass ihr dabei seid und wir wünschen einen großartigen Tag. Jetzt darf ich aber wieder an Julia übergeben, die dann gleich die Keynote ankündigt.
Ja, danke Diana, danke Philipp, das ist toll, ne? So Schalten durch Deutschland. Das ist wirklich, man fühlt sich ein bisschen wie im Fernsehstudio. Bevor es gleich losgeht, dann endlich inhaltlich im Programm noch so ein paar Hinweise eher technischer Natur. Nochmal zur Beruhigung alle, die das Paket nicht bekommen haben, das ist kein Problem. Ihr habt alles, was ihr braucht, um heute teilzunehmen. Wir führen euch da durch. Das ist tatsächlich unsere erste Großveranstaltung im virtuellen Raum. Das ist ganz schön aufregend, aber ich hoffe mal, dass alles klappt. Wir haben versucht, das so intuitiv und selbsterklärend wie möglich alles anzulegen, falls ihr doch mal verloren gehen solltet oder technische Probleme habt. Dann gibt es mehrere Möglichkeiten. In Talk gibt es oben in der Navigationsleiste den Reiter Support und da findet ihr wirklich ganz viele Informationen, Hilfestellungen und wichtig, den Kontakt auch zu unserer technischen Hotline. Das sind unsere lieben Kolleginnen Sandra und Rosta, die ihr kontaktieren könnt, die euch gerne weiterhelfen. Wenn alle Stricke reißen, ihr vielleicht nicht mal auf Talk gekommen seid, dann könnt ihr immer noch eine E-Mail schreiben. Ganz einfach an digitalsummit@körber mit oe-stiftung.de. Und dann helfen wir euch so gut wir können. Das sollte alles klappen. Wir freuen uns natürlich auch, wenn wir nicht in einem Raum sind, auf eure Beteiligung. In den Sessions ist das ja sowieso klar. Ansonsten seid ihr alle herzlich eingeladen, über Mentimeter, das wir nutzen, eure Fragen, eure Anmerkungen uns mit auf den Weg zu geben. Das erreicht ihr über menti.com und die PIN, die ihr braucht, ist die 2919135. Keine Sorge, die wird auch immer wieder eingeblendet, sodass ihr da ja auf jeden Fall reinkommt. Ja, passt bitte auch auf, das hat mir mein Kollege Mustafa eben noch mitgegeben, wenn ihr in Talk seid, auf das sogenannte Nachrichtenfenster. Das ist auch oben in der Leiste so eine kleine Sprechblase. Wenn da was angezeigt wird, dann sind das Nachrichten von uns an euch, wenn es irgendwie ein Update gibt, wenn es Veränderungen gibt. Wenn ihr das im Blick behaltet, seid ihr immer auf dem Laufenden. So, jetzt aber zur Keynote. Die wird auf Englisch stattfinden, das schon mal vorab. Ich werde also auch gleich in meiner Anmoderation die Sprache wechseln, nicht wundern. Und ihr könnt euch entscheiden. Also ihr könnt das Ganze entweder mit einer Simultanübersetzung verfolgen ins Deutsche oder es gibt auch die Möglichkeit, das Ganze im Original mitzuverfolgen. Dann müsst ihr jetzt noch ganz fix auf die Facebook-Seite der Körber-Stiftung wechseln. Da gibt es das Ganze dann in Englisch. Und so viel zur Vorrede. Nun geht es zur Keynote nach Groningen in die Niederlande. If there ever was a time to learn from the future, it is now, says today's keynote speaker, Loes Damhof. Loes is a senior lecturer at Hansa University of Applied Sciences in Groningen in the Netherlands. For her innovative and inspiring teaching, she was awarded Lecturer of the Year in Higher Education in the Netherlands. That was in 2016, I think. And she is a consultant slash critical friend to the Dutch Ministry of Education, and also a highly demanded public speaker on national and international conferences. Over the past years, Loes has dedicated her work, her teaching, her research to what is called futures literacy, today's topic. And she, as one of the pioneers in this fairly new field, has actually contributed a lot to translating futures literacy from a rather theoretical framework to a very practical method of thinking, of reflecting, of asking questions that you can actually train, what she does a lot, and that you can apply to basically every subject, every field of interest. At Hansa University, Loes is currently implementing futures literacy as a key component in all master programs. She does research on it. She holds one of the UNESCO chairs in futures literacy. She is part of the UNESCO Global Network and facilitates futures literacy labs all over the world. And in addition to that, she's also about to found a new school, a school on activism called the Emergence Academy. So having said all this, I think it's become quite clear that Loes is a very busy person. And we are very happy to have her here today with us. And before I hand over to you, Loes, let me again encourage you all to participate, to submit your questions via Mentimeter. Everything you need to do that will be displayed in the live stream, so don't worry. I'll look at your questions and pass them on to Loes after her keynote. So now we all are looking very much forward to learning more about learning from the future. Loes, a very warm welcome to you. We're happy to have you. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this very elaborate and beautiful introduction. Thank you. Indeed, when I listen to it, I think I am very busy. So thank you so much for hosting me at the Digital Summit. I'm very honored to be here and to deliver this keynote and share some of my thoughts and a learning journey into the future and back. So, and I'm especially happy because I know I'm amidst friends, which means educators, since I'm an educator by heart, a teacher by heart. So very happy to be here. So as an educator, and I'm sure that you have experienced as well, is that last year has been quite challenging for education and learning. And whether that is because you have to move your classes online, or had to make different decisions about how to continue certain programs, curricula, think about how students would be able to meet and learn in a meaningful way. All these questions have come up over the past year. I'm sure that everybody has been, it's a challenge for everybody. And but besides what I've noticed in my university is that after this pandemic disrupted our lives, is that the first response is, how do we make sure that students are not, staying behind? So how do we use technology to continue this the learning? And I think that's extremely important. So there's a big question there on how to use technology, incorporate it in a more meaningful way into our teaching. And at the same time, it also maybe invokes some deeper questions about learning and education. And I think that the capability that I'm about to introduce to you, futures literacy, can play a very important role in that. Because what we have learned is that times are uncertain and that the future is uncertain. And you might agree with me that it feels like the future is more uncertain than ever. It is not. It has always been uncertain, but now we perceive it as more uncertain, and we perceive it even more as more complex. Also, that is not true. That life and universe and everything around us has always been complex, but now we feel that urgency more. That it feels like the ground has shifted, and that's because the assumptions that we had about learning, about teaching, about education, about systems, those assumptions are being challenged at the moment. And that is what futures literacy is about. It's a capability that can allow you to have a different relationship with uncertainty and complexity. So besides all the digital skills that we think that are very important in education right now, it is also important to question and to have a good look at how we relate to uncertainty and complexity, not just as a capability for students to become futures literate, but also for higher educational institutes to implement this kind of thinking in their strategic decision-making processes. So I would argue with this, and I will get more into depth with Julia at the end of my talk, is to really look at how, okay, this is a capability we can all learn and teach, and how do we use this to make different decisions and make better informed decisions in the future. So I'm going to take you through some basic concept of future literacy, making the distinction between the capability and the methodology, which are future literacy laboratories. So let me just start. So I said the time to learn from future is now. It's always been a good time, but I think now, especially because we are confronted with the uncertainty of the future, it actually is more present to look at how we anticipate even more. So I'm just going to take you with a few slides through this concept. And start with a quote of my good friend Bayo Akomolafe. He's a brilliant Nigerian poet, writer, activist, philosopher, speaker, thought leader, especially on climate change. And this is a proverb. It says, "These are urgent times, let us slow down." And that may feel a little bit contradiction, like thinking, okay, we feel urgency. There's a lot of challenges for the next generation to enter the job market, our students. And at the same time, this is precisely the time that we should really rethink our next steps in order to speed up. But if we make decisions too quick, feeling this uncertainty, we might end up making the same mistakes at the past. So this is a good time to slow down, even for just a minute or just a few hours, but slow down and really think about how do we use the future. So future literacy, like I said, is a capability. And I want to make that distinction between the capability, which I will talk about first, and then a little bit of the methodology. The capability is a skill, a competency that we can learn and practice and apply. And it's about imagining multiple and diverse futures. Right? It's the practice of looking through futures as they were lenses, as a pair of glasses, to look at the present anew, to look at the world with a fresh pair of eyes. Or we would say we're using the future to innovate the present. Now, using the future might already seem a little bit alien to you. How do you do that? Like a pen or a phone? Or, yeah, it kind of is, right? Because the future does not exist. So, but we see her around us all the time. So when we look around, there's a lot of talk about the future right now. Design your future, make your future, transform your future, building the future. We are future makers, etc. And a lot of educational institutes are approaching it like the students should make futures. The thing is, there are two misconceptions about this. First of all, there is not one future. There are multiple futures. My future is very different than yours. And the person next to you. So there's not just one, but we look at the future like there is one. We talk about it like there is only one, but there are multiple futures, and I'll get a little bit more into it in a minute. The other misconception here is that somehow you can make it or design it. We cannot, for the simple reason that the future only exists in our imagination. Every time we think about the future, it is an anticipation. It's not there yet. No one has been there. There's no data. No one has been to the future, has come back and told us this is what it will be like. So every time we do, however, say this is what it will be like, we make a prediction based on anticipation, based on images, based on stories, based on assumptions, based on data that we extrapolate into the future. Those are all extremely valid and extremely valuable. However, it still does not exist. The future is uncertain. The future is the later than now. That's it. That's the only definition. It's the later than now, the next second, next week, next hour, next year, etc. So think about that for a second, how when we think about the future, we make predictions or we hope or we dream, what an impact that has on how we behave in the present, and especially in education. Why? Because everything we do in our educational practices is that we plan and prepare for the future. We want students to be ready for jobs, whether they exist or new jobs. We are planning a curriculum years ahead. We're looking at what the job market wants, and then we translate it to our programs. Or we look at society in itself. So we're constantly, the pull from the future is very, very present in educational practices. So it might be a very good idea, especially for us, to look at how we anticipate, because it matters, because it changes the present. Now, how do we use the future? The first way that was very, very common for us is planning in order to optimize the future. And I use this picture because I'm a rock climber. And this is a little bit of an extreme example of how you can really plan in order to get an optimal result. This is Alex Honnold. He's a free solo rock climber. He climbs El Capitan, 1,000 meters of sheer granite without a rope or protection. How did he do that? By eliminating all uncertainty, by planning every little step on that rock before he did it without a rope. So in that sense, so really plan so carefully, thinking if I eliminate all uncertainty, he feels safe enough to do this without protection. Now think about how often do we actually do that we feel the need to plan everything so carefully that there are no surprises, and then we feel safe and we feel a sense of control. Of course, reality is we never have control. And even Alex knows this. One little misstep, one little bird that drops on his head, and it has the highest consequences. But he felt safe because in his mind, he eliminated all uncertainty. And that's often how we approach the future. We plan for an optimal result, plan everything very carefully. That's that's how we often get through our day. And that's often how we work very efficiently. Another way to use the future is preparing ourselves not for an optimal result, but for something that we think is going to happen, that we might fear. A third wave of corona. We prepare for vaccine distribution. We prepare for maybe for another year of doing online teaching. Yeah, so the moment COVID hits, we started planning, but we're also starting to prepare ourselves for certain predictions. So these two ways of using the future, planning and preparation, are very common and they're very useful, and that's how we often go around our business. But it's also limited. It's one leg, we call it. That's the one leg that we try to walk on. There's also another leg, and that is how do we use future for the unexpected? Yeah, because the unexpected, as COVID has taught us, of course, is the spontaneity, the emergence, the novelty that we cannot plan or prepare for. COVID is a scenario that we did not plan or prepare for, and now we're here. So how can we use the future to be open for these kind of emerging phenomena? We do this by exploring multiple futures and possible futures, probable futures, plausible futures, desirable futures, alternative futures, bizarre futures. By exploring a multiple set of scenarios, so really moving away from the one prediction that we often are presented with, we train ourselves, our imaginatory brains or muscles, to really see that, hey, if I imagine multiple futures, can I be more open for spontaneity? Can I actually maybe even, not be afraid of uncertainty, not feel the need to plan everything, but maybe even appreciate it, or maybe even embrace uncertainty and complexity? And that's the other leg. And we need both planning and preparation, because that's how we, go around our day, and And the other leg, using the future. So by imagining, stretching the imagination to become more comfortable with novelty, for the new, for emergence. Now, how do this that all sounds maybe a little bit abstract. So how do you really do that? How do you identify these anticipatory systems, the ways of thinking, the ways of using the future in order to anticipate? We do this by first embracing the fact that all predictions and hopes are based on assumptions. And it's important to become aware of those assumptions, right? It's important to become aware of the sources of our hopes and fears. And how do we, because these assumptions, the assumption that tomorrow the sun will come up, that's an assumption, although I'm pretty sure it will, it's still an assumption. The assumption that next year I will still have my job, the assumption that COVID will disappear, that things will go back to normal, or things will forever be different. Those are all assumptions that we're making every day constantly. They're not bad, they're extremely useful, but it's important to become aware of them, because then we understand why and how we anticipate. And that matters because then we get a better understanding of how we behave in the present and make better informed decisions. So this is future literacy in a nutshell. Identifying your assumptions by exploring multiple futures, so understanding where these assumptions come from, and then really with that pair of lenses, look at the present anew. So now this is the capability, and it takes time to practice it. And one way, one tool, one methodology to use to practice that capability is through futures literacy laboratories, which are experimental workshops, very hands-on. Because I know as an educator, when I listen to a new, and we're like, yeah, that sounds really great, but how do I do that? So these laboratories are very hands-on workshops, and I believe there's one organized by UNESCO this afternoon. I hope I'm correct. So these laboratories, these hands-on workshops are learning by doing processes. And they have a couple of things that are very important. First, they're based on the collective intelligence of the group. That means that you put people together in small groups and exchanging and sharing your future images. That in itself stretches the imagination and coming to understand that someone else's future image is different than yours. It's also, future literacy laboratories also knowledge creation process, because we're creating together new images of the future. So we're sharing, debating, negotiating the shared meaning of things. And every future literacy workshop or lab, it goes through 3 phases. It's really about revealing our existing assumptions, reframing them, looking at the narrative itself, looking at those narratives, examining them. Where do they come from? Becoming aware of that, and then rethinking our decision-making, our policy, our innovative practices in the present. So maybe as an educators, we always, in every future literacy process, we follow this learning curve, which is really about revealing assumptions, reframing them by exploring a different future, and then rethinking new questions that come up. So this steep learning curve is really at the heart of each future literacy activity or lab intervention. And that's how we practice the capability, is by exploring multiple futures, imagining reframe scenarios, reframe futures, understanding where these assumptions come from, and through those lenses, look at the present anew. So this is, and like I said, this is a capability that is important for students. Why? Because one of the, if you are a futures literate person, there are 3 elements that you can that are key to this process. The first one is enhanced perception. Can you see more opportunities? Do you see multiple paths emerge? The other one is embracing complexity. And embracing it, I mean, really fully appreciating, maybe even take advantage of the complexity, not trying to solve it, but appreciate it. And the third one is, can we, through future literacy, relocate our sense of agency, coming up with a new way of doing things? Now, these three elements are key to becoming futures literate. And like I said, this is an extremely important capability for students to have, because it's important to relate to the world around us and look at it and appreciate spontaneity and deal with uncertainty, but also for educational institutes to find this kind of, to try to implement this mindset in their strategic decision-making processes. Because we can teach students a different mindset, but if we are not embracing that mindset as educators ourselves on each level of educational institutes, then it just becomes a gimmick and we are not practicing what we preach. So I welcome you to ask me anything about this process, any experience, or I have a lot of experience and examples to give about this capability, and hopefully we can start a very meaningful conversation.
Thank you very much, Loes. I think we got lots of ideas and input from you to start this discussion. Thanks a lot for that. And we got the first questions from the audience, and I think I'm going to start with one that actually aims at the question you raised yourself in the end. I mean, you developed the concept and the methodology of futures literacy in the context of higher education. And the question from quite a few people from the audience is, how can you translate or transfer that to the school system?
Right.
And what could be first steps to go in that direction?
Yes, that's good. So this is a capability that you can teach, right? So you can develop classes and in the curriculum. But I think that with every educator, I'm sure that if you think that students should adopt, whether it's critical thinking or a mindset, design thinking, for example, it's important that as an educator you acquire that capability yourself. So start educating yourself. I think it's important. And as a teachers, but also the supporting staff, or even, and just maybe I can illustrate this with a very specific example. 2 years ago, it seems longer, before COVID anyway, my financial director of my university came to me and said, Loes, we are looking into building a huge exam hall for students to do online testing. So we're thinking about spending millions of euros building a hall and then putting hundreds of students and doing online testing at the same time. I thought, oh, okay. And he said, but we're not really sure if that's the future. Testing, assessing, online testing, whether we should actually invest in it. Can you help us out? And I said, sure. And 4 directors asked me that question. And I said, okay. I said, but we need the perspectives. If we really want to think about the future of assessments, of testing in itself, then we should get the perspectives of students there as well. So we designed a 24-hour session with 4 directors, 4 team leaders, 4 teachers, and 4 students, so 16 people in total. And we really looked at the future of assessment and measuring the measurement of assessment. And what came out of that session was a whole new idea on what measurements on testing is, right? Is it, they ask themselves question, is it control? Is it appraisal? Is it a way to learn? Is it, what are we trying to test? Whether is it just a moment in time? What is the actual purpose of measuring or testing and assessment in education? So we came to some really fundamental questions and concerns, and they decided that we should really rethink and put this in a new vision on assessment. So they changed their mind. They said, we're really going to look differently at testing. We're not going to build that building. Right now, they're obviously very happy that they didn't, because it would be empty. So that's one thing. But it changed. Not only it gave them an answer not to build that exam hall, but it also offered them an opportunity to start a debate around in the whole university about assessment, what assessment really is. And the product that came out of that was a new vision on testing and measuring and assessment. that is now being implemented. Now, when COVID happened, of course, there was also a great opportunity to start that conversation. It became a lot easier to talk about it. What is it that we really want to do? If we tell students there's a central exam and you need to learn this, what is it really about that we think we can accomplish? So it became, and this is what I mean by implementing it on an educational level, right? So you can use these processes to really rethink those questions that are so fundamental to learning. And by becoming futures literate yourself, whether you're an executive, the provost of a university, or a teacher or a student, you will see that you'll start making different decisions and better informed decisions. So that ultimately will trickle down in everything you do. But you can also use it as a way to rethink some system. I wouldn't say that it goes really deep on a certain level, but I think it has really changed the trajectory of the university, at least regarding to assessment. So I hope that's kind of a direct example of the impact it can have.
Mhm. But does it mean that you need like the decision makers who understand the concept of futures literacy, or can you also start like as a single teacher and
Absolutely, yes,
make
of
a
course,
difference?
of course, of
What could
course.
be a first step
Yeah,
for an
yeah,
individual teacher and
yeah. Yeah, of course you can. I'm sure that anybody who's done anything who calls himself a pioneer or an innovator or want to try something new, it is important that you start from the bottom up, that you start to experiment and test. And if that kind of works, it's also important from top down, to get space to do that, right? It's just, but as a teacher, if you think this is interesting, just asking simple questions as what if. Just try to students how they see the future of their learning. How do they see the future of education? How would they like to learn? So just by creating space in your own classroom, just asking people, your students, how do you see the future of, I don't know, society? And think like far away, like 50, 60, 70 years from now. We never think about 5 years down the road. We always talk about 50 or 40 or even 100 years down the road. Why? Because we want to get away from the present, right? And if you talk about the future 5 years from now, it's a very good chance you're just going to extrapolate the now into 5 years. So we're always pushing a little bit further. So as a teacher, we are educating teachers in this capability and helping them designing and implementing in their curriculum. But just opening up a conversation about how students see futures, what different futures they have, and just by collecting all those different future images is already eye-opening, and that is incredibly simple. Or saying, what if maybe a good example is once we explored a reframe a future, was about the future of learning, with a lot of educators all throughout the city here, the municipality. And we talked about, we explored probable futures and desirable futures, and everybody had a different image. And then we gave them a scenario saying, what if in 2060, when you are born, you have all the knowledge and skills inside of you, but once you get older, you will slowly lose it. So learning becomes unlearning. It's a crazy scenario. It doesn't make any sense. If you're a baby, you already know everything. It doesn't make any sense. But it's not supposed to make sense. It's supposed to provoke and invoke us questioning what learning is all about. So those educators thought about, they said, oh, but if you're born and you already have all that knowledge, then you should work really hard to keep it, to make sure. And other people say, well, wait a minute. If you're unlearning, then you're also learning something. And when we look at kids, we see they're so imaginative and creative, and they slowly lose it. So what if in this scenario, it would be the reversed case? So maybe it's not a bad thing. And they said, but if I value creativity and imagination and going back to that innocence, almost innocent wisdom, what does that mean for my own teaching? So we had a very profound conversation about what learning is all about. And ultimately, you get to the bottom of the assumptions that you're making, that certain learning is good, that learning that learning has certain elements that we should always follow. And by questioning that, that really opens you up for different ways of learning and teaching. So I think that is from every level, you can start asking these questions, but it starts, with the teacher, I think, itself. Sorry.
So I understand from what you said that you can actually start in your own class, you can implement it in your subject. It doesn't need a separate subject, futures literacy necessarily. And I think the questions are flying in. I'm trying to to get an overview, but I think I saw one that ties in quite nicely to what you said last. How old are your students, and does it also work? Can you apply the method to very young kids, for example, in primary schools?
Yes,
I'd say probably yes, from what you said.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I have to say, my students are university students, so right, so between 17 and 25, I would say. But once and with little ones, there's an American organization called teachthefuture.org. And it's not entirely futures literacy the way we practice it, but they developed great stuff about how to teach futures for little kids. But we once did this experiment with 20 14-year-olds at a secondary school, and it was 2 full days, and we explored. We did a future literacy laboratory, and we made sure it was playful, and but it was interesting to see that in the beginning we asked them, how do you think the future of school looks like? And we promised them, if at the end they were allowed to design their own ideal school day, and if it were not too crazy, then the management team of the school would adopt it and we would actually do it. So we asked them in the beginning, so how do you think the future of school education looks like? And, they came up with, like desktop touchscreen desks and really cool and gadgets and high tech. And but after 2 days of exploring multiple futures and giving them scenarios without technology, how would you learn in only learning from nature? They came up with a plan for a school day that they said, we only want to learn outside, and they're still school buildings, but we go inside to play games. And they said that if we sit together, we only want to sit in a circle so we can look at each other. And there are no more teachers. We want to learn from each other. And there may be some coaches walking around, they said. But we always want to learn outside. So in the summer, we continue to go to school. And in the winter, we are on a break. So we can learn outside in nature, whether it's math or biology or history. They were fine with the subjects. They just really talked about the way they were learning. And when they presented it, they built beautiful sculptures, presented it to the management. The management said that this doesn't sound very innovative. It's because where's the technology? And that was, apart from that, it was kind of heartbreaking. It was also interesting to see that they did not hear the desire for autonomy of learning and the desire to be independent and to learn from each other. Technology was just a means to an end. That was not that important. It wasn't about technology. It was about how can we maintain the autonomy of our own learning and take the ownership of our own learning. So I think it is totally possible, because everybody, even a baby, uses the future. Right? Even animals, living organisms, use the future. So everybody can stretch their imagination. Doesn't matter what age. And everybody can become more aware of how they do that. I fundamentally believe that. But I don't have a lot of experience with little ones, so I'm welcoming anybody who wants to try. I'll be happy to assist.
That's a great offer. I'm going to add a question from a teacher who is teaching at a vocational school, who also says this concept sounds a bit academic to me, and how could I sort of get my students enthusiastic about this idea? How can I sort of catch them?
Yes. That's really good. It is the way if I explain it, it comes from it stems from UNESCO. UNESCO developed this, and UNESCO is, the UN organization for science, education, and culture. And they designed this for policymakers to rethink migration and climate change, technology, etc. So yeah, it stems from a more academic, academic field. But the way we do it, the laboratories, the workshop, are extremely hands-on. When we use arts and building sculptures and try to use different ways of language or expressing yourselves, and we're literally imagining multiple futures. So the process in itself, the way we design it, is very hands-on, extremely practical. There's not a story. This is just a kind of a little bit of the theoretical framework, and there's a lot more for the people who like that. So there's a lot more. This is just a short introduction. But the way we do it is really learning by doing, and just asking people, what do you think the future of learning look? Just ask yourself that question. What do you think in 2060 learning will look like? Think about it. What do you think? And then ask yourself the question, what do you hope learning will look like in 2060? Even by just putting these two next to each other will give you an insight that, hey, that can, and just by sharing that's not academic, that's just sharing our images. And what you see, especially with younger people, is that nobody is an expert on the future. So you can perfectly set an expert, a professional today, next to a younger person of, say, 12 or 13. If you talk about 2060, nobody knows. So then it becomes an even playing field to share those debates, because the person of 12, their images of the future are just as valid. And that's why it really breaks down these barriers. And expertise, it gets a different meaning. We're experts of the present and the past, yeah. And we think we have ideas about the future, but we just do not know. So these processes are very design-based. And if you want to do very action research, so the workshops are extremely practical and creative and fun, because it is fun to explore multiple futures. So, and if you approach it like that, not with a theoretical framework, but just say, let's paint, draw, act, sing, play multiple futures. That in itself is that's a low-hanging fruit, but that's an already incredible, empowering activity to do, because then you're, even also young people get the idea, whoa, I'm not just this helpless pawn waiting for a future to arrive. I can actually, by imagining, I have a different relationship with it. And that is incredibly empowering in itself.
I got more questions for you. And there are two concerning or touching on the matter. Where do we get our imagination, our pictures from? And someone hinting at like the popular culture and the role, yes, for example, like the big Hollywood movies play, and that especially young people get the pictures, their imagination from those movies. And are there maybe more creative ways? And the second question I'd like to add immediately is, could dealing with science fiction literature be a way to discuss multiple futures with students?
Absolutely. I mean, that's an incredibly powerful way. And I would have to say that really think about, try to add diversity to those sci-fi novels, right? Right now I'm reading Octavia Butler, who's one of the first African-American female sci-fi writers, which really adds a different perspective than, for example, a lot of other sci-fi writers. So, and I'm saying this because a lot of the images, Hollywood or sci-fi and the novels and all these pop culture references, who came up with these stories and what do they represent? Because they're absolutely right, is that these images are given to us, right? So they inspire us, but they also put images in our mind. There is, of course, policy and media narratives, but pop culture is incredibly important. So then, if we're seeing that as the future. So for a long time, sci-fi was all about, a lot of technical stuff. You still see that in a lot of countries, that the billboards of the next city all look the same. High rise and flying cars and technology, etc. So they have a very similar image. You think, oh, okay, so somebody came up with that image. But it's extremely powerful to create different narratives. Think about Black Panther. The movie Black Panther comes from Hollywood, but to have that image of Wakanda, this innovative, incredible fictional African country that really reshaped the narrative of what Africa is as a continent. It's extremely powerful. So yes, it can definitely help. It can definitely inspire you to create different stories, and also realize that because we are so poor in imagining, we suffer from the poverty of imagining. We're trying to overcome the poverty of imagination. And because we're so poor at it, we lean on these images, and other people make these images. And if Hollywood can influence, can colonize our images of the future, then companies colonize our images of the future too. So so what I'm trying to say is that are we going to leave that imaginative power to the few people that have that influence? Or do we reclaim the power of imagination and use these stories as diverse stories, because that's very important, so we can really decolonize the futures that are meant to be for all.
We already got to wrap up our discussion, Loes.
Oh.
What a pity! I think there'd be so much more to talk about, and there are more questions. I'm sorry to everybody, I can't pick up all of them. I'm gonna raise two last questions. One is, could you please say why we never heard of futures literacy in Germany? I don't know if you have an explanation. And the second one is, can you give us some advice as to literature or more resources that we can use if we want to dive in deeper into futures literacy?
Yes. Well, there's good news. Well, let me first say this is fairly new in the sense that UNESCO has been doing this. Riel Miller, he's the head of Future Literacy UNESCO. He has developed the framework, and it is just the latest addition to the large tent of anticipation and future studies. So there's been foresight and forecasting, scenario planning, etc. So this is different in the sense that it adds the element of looking at assumptions to be open for emergence, right? That's what it brings to the table. So this is fairly new. And when I started 5 years ago, there was Riel Miller, UNESCO, and a few futurists working with this in UNESCO. But there was no one who actually, could explain it to me in layman terms. And the good news is that my friend Stefan Bergheim, who just published a book, Zukunft. Do I say that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So plural. And he is really busy on organizing future literacy laboratories in German for the German market, and also looking for ways to do this in education. So please keep that in mind. And you haven't heard from it because it's a new way of thinking. And it's only this now, because we are in COVID, it is starting to land for people like, oh, the assumption. COVID has taught us about our assumptions about continuity and discontinuity. And that's really what it has done. So all of a sudden, we're thinking futures is not just about predicting, it's understanding where our hopes and fears come from, so we can make better informed decisions. And so we really, and we turned into a competency for education. So that's why it's still relatively new. So don't feel like, oh, we're running behind. You're not. You're right on time. So and I invite everybody to join me on this incredible journey, because there's still a lot of research to be done for intercultural context, for example, with younger kids, how a lot of research on the impact and the outcomes, etc. So I think it's only great that we're just getting started. So it's an exciting place to be. And for literature, for resources, check out Riel Miller's book, which is Transforming the Future: Anticipation in the 21st Century. Who's a book. It's pretty heavy on the theoretical work. I've been publishing, doing some work with the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies, And of course, UNESCO has a lot more. Riella has a lot of articles about that. And just check out. Once you dive into it, future literacy, there is a lot to explore. But from the German side, check out Steffen Bergheim.
Well, thank you so much, Loes. I'm sure your very passionate talk today helps a lot, contributes a lot to spread the idea in Germany. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and of course we'll collect all the information and the links and everything in our cloud. There is you can find that on Talk, so
Yes.
you can follow up everybody,
and people can email me too, right? Because we train people online now. So you're very welcome to join some of our trainings and know more. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Great offer. And I'd suggest that we just pass all the questions that we couldn't raise and pick up in our discussion now to you, Loes, and maybe you find the time to just give a few cues to the people, and
Sure,
we can
no
post
problem.
everything on Talk and share our thoughts. So thanks again for being with us. And now I'm going to switch back to German for some short instructions on what's coming up next. Thanks, Loes, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you.
Okay, also jetzt wieder auf Deutsch. Wir machen jetzt eine kleine Pause. Ich glaube, wir haben genug Stoff, den wir ein bisschen verdauen können. Wir verabschieden uns an dieser Stelle von allen, die per Livestream zugeschaltet sind, weil nach dieser kleinen Pause geht es direkt in die Sessions, zu denen ja nur die registrierten Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer Zugang haben. Also alle die nicht dabei sind, können jetzt eine längere Pause machen. Für alle anderen gilt, es geht um 15:15 Uhr, also in einer Viertelstunde weiter. In Kürze, um 15 Uhr, sollten die Links gepostet werden zu euren Sessions. Ihr habt euch ja für eine angemeldet, ihr seid zugeteilt und genau dieser Button sollte in Talk für euch erscheinen, beziehungsweise ihr habt den Link zugeschickt bekommen. Und ab 15:10 Uhr könnt ihr diese Sessionräume, das sind Zoom-Räume, betreten. Wie gesagt, ihr wisst, unter Support technische Hotline, wenn ihr Probleme habt, guckt da einfach nochmal rein, meldet euch bei den Kolleginnen. Ich gucke nochmal, ob ich eine wichtige Information vergessen habe. Ich glaube nicht. Ansonsten meldet ihr euch. Die Kolleginnen und Kollegen helfen gerne weiter. Ich wünsche euch ganz, ganz viel Spaß in den Sessions beim wirklich aktiven Austausch, jetzt face-to-face zumindest über die Bildschirme. Wir sehen uns später zur Panel-Diskussion hier auf der großen Bühne um 17 Uhr wieder. Also macht's gut, viel Spaß.